Welcome to episode 35 of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast, a bi-weekly look at cybersecurity, including interviews, news, expert tips, and the latest trends. I'm Kevin Baxter, and I'm joined by my Firewalls.com colleague, Andrew Harmon.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you, Andrew, as we tackle a different featured topic each episode. New ones are normally out every other Wednesday, so subscribe or follow on your favorite podcasting platform to get the latest first. Please do rate and review us, or you can drop us a line anytime at podcast@firewalls.com. As always, thanks for listening, and now it's time to introduce our featured topic with a holiday twist for this episode.
Christmas time brings many traditions, presents, decorations, delicacies like fruitcake and eggnog, as well as apparently some type of raw meat sandwich if you live in Wisconsin, plus much more. Another of those traditions involves the sharing of stories written long ago. Last year on Ping, we brought you a cybersecurity Christmas carol written by Dickens himself, probably, complete with voice acting by ours truly. Not sure how to pluralize that.
So this year we thought we'd continue our somewhat younger tradition by sharing another classic tale crafted nearly 2 centuries ago. Join us, if you will, for a retelling of the poetic masterpiece passed down through the generations, Twas the Hack Before Christmas.
'Twas the night before Christmas of 2020, but hackers were plotting every vulnerability. The holiday season's a time to relax, but bad actors don't relent. Them's just the facts. The laptops left on, the smart home was humming. It was plain to see an attack was incoming. John had been working from home due to COVID-19, and he'd just clicked an email opened up on his screen. The link said click here for an order update. He did because his present was arriving late.
Flashed up a new window, and on the screen said, enter username password in required fields marked red. With a few keystrokes, typed the info he did, and just like that, John's credentials no longer hid. For all of his holiday wanting and wishing, poor John had become a victim of phishing. A problem this was on a micro level, as John's account access was the hackers to revel. But on a macro scale, the problem was worse. John's login information repeated chapter and verse.
Across his devices, accounts all the same, he'd not heeded the warning to vary their names. Now Amazon, now Gmail, now Walmart and Chase, on Dropbox, on PlayStation, on Apple and Book of Face. To the top of the page, posting right on the wall, now hack away, hack away, hack away all. Worst of all, yet to come, more access to gain. John's login could sign in to his corporate network main. But this being Christmas, a happier tale, a breach of his company would go beyond the pale.
So how'd they protect against such an attack? A layered approach, a security stack. When bad actors attempted through the VPN access, they found John's credentials not enough for success. Multi-factor authentication meant more was required. A code to his phone on login attempt fired. But that wasn't all to Secure Business Hub. More protection made data a great challenge to scrub. Suspicious activity would also be blocked by a box where all traffic both in and out flocked.
The powerful appliance looked simple enough, but despite its appearance, its security was tough. Lights flashed on the front, cables plugged in the back. Advanced protection made it near impervious to attack. By now you may have guessed what this box may be. It was a firewall built to make hackers turn and flee. So John's phishing ordeal not the end of the world, as his work's multi-layered protection unfurled. And he updated username passwords his own to keep his personal info from being prone.
The holiday saved with the right kind of protection, and training would help John with phishing detection. So visions of sugar plums stockings returned, with bad actors' attempts at a hack having spurned. Santa still on his way to deliver John's gifts, and now John more vigilant to avoid online grifts. So with that comes the end of our Christmas hack fright. Happy Christmas to all, and to all, a good night. Now it's time for headlines. In this regular segment, we take a closer look at a few top stories in the cybersecurity world and what they may mean to you. On to headline number 1. U.S. agencies hacked in months-long global cyber spying campaign. So if you were worried we wouldn't have enough news to cover as the year winds down toward the quiet of the holiday season, well, you would have been wrong. Quite to the contrary, in fact, the cybersecurity arena is the gift that keeps on giving when it comes to headlines lately. So what's our first one all about, Andrew?
Well, anybody that's watched the news in this last week or two probably have seen this story already, but hackers have broken into the Department of Treasury as well as Commerce in the United States, and likely a much longer list, which will sort of unfurl for us over the coming weeks as we learn more about this incident.
Yeah, it's part of a long-term, what's being phrased as a global cyber espionage campaign. This is connected to another hacking story that we heard about a week before, the government hacks, and that is that the prominent cybersecurity firm FireEye said it had been breached in an attack that industry experts said looked very much like Russian tradecraft.
Right. There's a lot of finger pointing in this story, so hope everybody can follow along. FireEye, as you said, has been hacked about a week ago, or at least admitted to being hacked about a week ago, and many of their customers consist of these big government agencies like the Treasury and Commerce departments.
Yeah, and our friends at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, who we actually had a guest from CISA on a few episodes ago. And ever since we had them on, it seems like we've heard a whole lot about this agency that we may not have heard that much about beforehand. Correlation equal causation, you be the judge of that. But yeah, they issued an emergency directive calling on all federal civilian agencies to scour their networks for compromises.
Right, and so this is following in the footsteps of FireEye's big breach in which their own hacking tools were pilfered by this yet unnamed but suspected threat actor. And so these are tools that FireEye themselves use to sort of test and probe their customers looking for vulnerabilities so that they can then patch those up. And this particular vulnerability was due to the server software called SolarWinds.
Right. SolarWinds is a very popular piece of server software. On its website, SolarWinds says it has 300,000 customers worldwide, including all 5 branches of the U.S. military, the Pentagon, the State Department, NASA, the National Security Agency, or NSA as it's more commonly known, the Department of Justice, and the White House. It also says the 10 leading U.S. telecom companies and top 5 U.S. accounting firms are among customers. So kind of a big deal.
Yeah, that includes most Fortune 500 companies. So FireEye said in its blog post that the investigation has found that this is a pretty large global campaign. So foreign governments outside of the United States are also likely heavily impacted.
Yeah, and as you said, I think we are probably just scratching the surface here of what is getting impacted by this. But the CISA directive, which is only the 5th since they were created in 2015, said U.S. agencies should immediately disconnect or power down any machines running the impacted SolarWinds software. But because of its ubiquity and widespread use, that might not be as simple as just saying like, oh, let's unplug all our computers right now, because that might cause some other business disruptions there.
Right. So this particular malware that affected SolarWinds was slipped into a software update back sometime in the spring. I believe they said April or March around that time, basically allowing the threat actors pretty open access to the victim's networks, what one researcher called God mode access to the network. So pretty worrying.
Yeah, it's pretty major amount of access, not just a tiny bit, pretty much all around access to a network. The one positive news is that the malware within that SolarWinds update did not seed self-propagating malware like the NotPetya malware that was blamed on Russia that caused more than $10 billion in damage globally back in 2016. That means any actual infiltration of an infected organization required a lot of planning and manual interaction. So the organizations that are being hacked and that will be discovered to have been hacked are ones that were especially targeted.
Right. This isn't a worm gone rogue. This is someone sitting at a keyboard somewhere and manually hitting all these individual agencies. The good news is that since so many people were affected by this, very likely only a small subset of everybody that was infected was actually being persistently targeted. So while hundreds might be affected, hopefully only a few agencies were the main primary focus.
Yeah, and that goes back to bandwidth, really, for whoever is involved in this hack, because if you do need that, what former CISA director Chris Krebs called exceptional tradecraft and time to execute this stuff, you also need a lot of people. And so there's only so many people that you probably have in your expertise area to execute some type of hack like this. So that does limit its scope, but it also means that the places that did get hacked could have been very hacked, I guess is what I would say.
So FireEye is obviously a pretty large target in the network security space. You may remember that they responded to the Sony as well as the Equifax data breaches. They were involved with thwarting an attack on the Saudi Arabian oil industry. And so they're a pretty global player on the scene, basically, and kind of makes sense that people are gunning for them, really.
Right. And Russia was identified as the protagonist in numerous aggressions by FireEye. So FireEye's found Russia to be involved in a number of hacks. So if in fact Russia is involved in this one and they went after FireEye, it kind of all makes sense. And experts do believe that Russian hackers are to blame. But so far, we did get one response from Russia's U.S. embassy on Facebook, which says these accusations are unfounded. So take that as you will.
I'm sure we will continue to hear more, and maybe we'll have an update for you next episode.
Yeah, I don't think this one is going away or anything. One of the experts interviewed in this piece by the AP also said there was no indication that they got customer information from FireEye's consulting or breach response businesses or the threat intelligence data it collects. So again, it seems very focused in what was done. Basically, the hackers took some tools from FireEye and then used those tools to really help get into some of these government agencies and potentially other targets. So one more thing that's sort of a segue into our next story that was mentioned in this piece was that, again, the reason why maybe more places haven't been hacked is because some of the nation states involved in hacking might have their focuses elsewhere. So that's what we call a tease for the next story. On to headline number 2. Hackers threaten to disrupt COVID-19 vaccine supply chain. So this is big story number 2, and guess what? We'll hear CISA again in this one. As I mentioned, there was that discussion of other priorities for the hackers out there. And the other priority right now, a pretty big one, you guessed it, COVID-19 vaccines. Government officials and healthcare groups are growing increasingly concerned about nation states and criminal hackers targeting the supply chain for COVID-19 vaccines, Andrew.
Right. And by supply chain, we mean quite up and down the supply chain, everything from cold storage to distribution, manufacturers, really any angle to get their foot in the door in this entire vaccine distribution and creation process. They're gunning for it. They noticed an uptick in basically all aspects of the supply chain, and they really don't expect it to stop anytime soon. It'll probably continue upticking, whatever the ongoing version of that is.
Yeah, this piece from The Hill talked to Mark Rogers, who we actually mentioned, I think it was back in the early summer timeframe here on Ping. He is a leader of the COVID-19 CTI League that sort of tracks and helps defend against cyber attacks aimed at health groups in particular. He says that the league has seen ramped up attacks aimed at medical institutions corresponding to the increasingly positive news around vaccine development, and says that his suspicion is that all parties in the cybercriminal underground, from ordinary criminals to nation states recognize that the vaccines represent a golden opportunity.
Right. A lot of information to be learned, money to be made, things to be stolen. So one instance that we already know about of this sort of occurring is the Wall Street Journal reporting on North Korean state hackers who targeted 6 pharmaceutical companies here in the United States, as well as the United Kingdom and South Korea that are involved in developing the vaccine. So that includes Novavax as well as Johnson & Johnson.
Yeah. And that story actually reported at least 6 pharmaceutical groups. So could even have more than that. But, Johnson & Johnson and Novavax were not the first out that have gotten the emergency use authorizations and such from the FDA and from other countries. But Johnson & Johnson, I think, is sort of next in line of the vaccine makers. So in this piece, actually, they quote Johnson & Johnson CISO Maureen Allison, who spoke at Aspen Institute's virtual cyber summit. And she says, all chief information security officers in healthcare are seeing attempted penetrations by nation state actors, and not just North Korea, every single minute of every single day. So that gives you an idea of what they're dealing with.
Right. And I think it's this point in the story where we plug CISA again and hope they will return to our podcast. So
Yes.
Where do they come in here, Kevin?
So a report from IBM warned of a global phishing campaign targeting groups associated with cold storage for the COVID-19 vaccine process. So this is not the pharmaceutical groups that were mentioned in the Wall Street Journal piece. Researchers wrote that the precision targeting of executives and key global organizations hold the potential hallmarks of nation-state tradecraft, and CISA put out a corresponding alert encouraging U.S. organizations involved in the Operation Warp Speed vaccine distribution effort to review those findings from IBM.
Right. And cold storage is a necessary part of shipping and storing the vaccine. A lot of different medicines need to be stored at refrigerator temperature, and sounds like perhaps many of the vaccines are of the same vein. So at least one major cold storage group has already been targeted. That's Americold, one of the largest cold storage providers in the U.S. So they disclosed to the Security Exchange Commission in November that it had discovered its network had already been hit by a cybersecurity attack.
Yeah, and the company wrote in the filing with the SEC that it took immediate steps to help contain the incidents and implemented business continuity plans to continue ongoing operations, and is working closely with law enforcement, cybersecurity experts, and legal counsel. But I think the important thing to note here is not only that a lot of the vaccines will require refrigeration, but some of the vaccines, including, I believe, the first couple out of the gate here, require some extra cold storage, not just refrigeration. So they really rely on the expertise of some of these, specific cold storage companies that are able to accommodate that type of transportation and storage. And the problem is, cold storage companies have probably not worried too much about being cyber attack targets before. And that means they may not have spent so much on cybersecurity.
Yeah, they didn't really plan to be in the crosshairs as a cold storage company. So while well insulated from the heat, not so much from threat actors. Have you ever been in a cold storage truck, Kevin?
No, I don't think I've ever had the occasion to. Do you have some background inside of the trucks, or?
Yeah, they're cold.
That's good. It means the truck that you were involved with at least was working properly, I guess, right?
I believe so, yeah. So also on the table, the chopping block, so to speak, for potential targeting would be patient immunization records. So as we begin to actually distribute and vaccinate people, we'll want to keep track of who's who and who got what. And that's when all the wonderful medical records and medical history data comes into play and will become a big target.
Yeah, we know already that hospitals and healthcare facilities have been sort of ongoing targets for ransomware attacks and things of that nature. Sometimes those ransomware attacks are involving data theft as well now. but not sure if those are overlapping necessarily with this particular concern of immunization records being targeted. But again, it just shows that healthcare in general is a target here. And, for whatever reason, with immunization records, I'm not sure exactly what the gain would be going after those in particular, but if there's any manipulation happening there, it could maybe cause people who haven't been vaccinated to show that they had been vaccinated and make it difficult for them to get a vaccine, or, all sorts of things like that if there's any manipulation to that data.
Right. Use it to call people out on social media, things like that.
Yep. So acting CISA director Brendan Wales says that his agency is working with the NSA and the FBI to ensure that the Operation Warp Speed vaccine supply chain process does remain secure. And he notes that foreign nations have been targeting COVID-19 vaccine research and development initiatives really since the start of the pandemic. And we've talked about some of those targets as well over the past several months.
Right. And Mark Rogers, as we mentioned from the CTI League, says we may be nearing what looks like the finish line, but now is not the time for us to take the eye off the ball. So not sure what sport he's playing exactly, but it's a good sentiment as we sort of near the phase of everybody actually getting inoculated, and we're all pretty happy and optimistic. It's good to remember that there are still threats on the horizon.
Yeah, we need to keep our eye on the prize here, but not look too far ahead, basically. That was kind of a mixed sports metaphor. I didn't even notice it at the time, but now that you point that out, there aren't too many ball sports that involve a finish line. So maybe he's invented a new one that we just don't know about yet. Maybe
so. Maybe this whole vaccination thing is going to be a big slam dunk and a home run.
Touchdown. On to headline number 3. This is the third big story of the day that we're talking about. Google. Here's what caused our big global outage. So many of you may have awoken on Monday, December 14th to a scary sight. Maybe you couldn't flip on Ryan's World or PewDiePie on YouTube, or maybe you said, "Hey, Google," and Google didn't respond. Or maybe more importantly to some, you couldn't access your Gmail or cloud-stored work files. Why was that?
Well, I myself actually woke up Monday morning and tried to hop on YouTube and saw that I couldn't get in, and kind of said, whatever, and went to work anyways. So Google and many of its platforms were down for about 50 minutes, and everything sort of came to a standstill, especially for the Google Cloud infrastructure component things such as the cloud platforms, Cloud Console. So if you got things stored at Google Cloud Storage, you are more likely affected than just the average guy on YouTube.
Yeah, but really, so many people would be affected by this. I had sort of just been getting up and getting going and saw sort of the aftermath of it on Monday, because this was a little bit early in the morning. Definitely a time when some people have already started working. And of course, I'm talking in my Eastern time zone bubble, but there are plenty of people in other parts of the world who were in the middle of their workday or at a different time. It was from 6:55 to 7:52 a.m. Eastern time. So starting to affect people in the Eastern time zone in the US and affecting people all over the place otherwise. And as you mentioned again, almost any kind of Google platform, aside from the search function and its third-party ads in the searches and things like that. But almost any Google platform that required a login of some kind in particular was affected.
Right, and this was due to reduced capacity for Google's central identity management system. So if you were trying to sign in and it sent that query off to the cloud infrastructure, Google, nothing was being able to return. So anything, as you said, where you needed to log in, too bad.
And so Google came out the day after with a little bit more of an explanation. They said the root cause was an issue in Google's automated storage quota management system, which in turn reduced the capacity of the authentication system, which is why the logins were not being allowed.
Right. And I guess that means they had to turn the quota up from 2 bazillion to 3 bazillion or whatever.
Yeah, some kind of made up a gigantic number.
So this is also not the first worldwide outage of a public cloud provider. The other two big ones, AWS as well as Azure, have had similar incidents over the last 6 months or so.
Yeah, in fact, it was just in the previous 2 months, according to this story, and I think we've heard about them here and there. The Amazon Web Services outage occurred back in just November. That one lasted about 5 hours, and certainly people were noticing that as well. A lot of companies use Amazon Web Services for cloud hosting and things of that nature. So certainly a lot of impact there. And then Azure, as you said, was back in October, or just a month prior to that. And that was due to an error in Active Directory that also involved a sign-in issue, preventing people from signing into Office 365 and Microsoft Cloud applications.
I was wondering why I didn't get pestered to join Microsoft Teams that day.
Yeah, so all three of these are very, very, very major services that are heavily relied upon, both in the business world and in sort of the leisure space for people who may be wanting to stream something for entertainment purposes, just all sorts of places that these touch. And so it just reminds you how reliant we are on these and how little issue that might be occurring with any of them could cause some big problems.
That's true. I keep very little data on my actual devices as far as images and videos and documents. Most of that is in some sort of cloud storage for me. So if this were to become a permanent loss, I'd be a little SOL.
Yeah, and the way people work nowadays, you hop from device to device. You may be using just your phone and computer, or maybe you use multiple computers. Maybe you're checking stuff in the office, checking stuff at home, whatever, but you're relying on cloud services there to have those files and applications available to you in these different platforms. And so that's one reason why you wouldn't just be saving your content on your local device, because then you wouldn't be able to access it somewhere else. So the advantages of the cloud are many, but then you are relying on everything going right.
Right, as are the risks. Notably, Google Workspace had several apps down, including Google Meet. So obviously, in the time of remote work that we're all in now, that could have caused quite a few interruptions.
Yeah, Zoom probably got a little extra play for that hour or so, even though Zoom has already been getting quite a bit of extra play over the course of the pandemic. But yeah, I mean, Google Meet, Gmail, Calendar, Docs, Google Drive, pretty much anything if you work in Google Workspace, as you said, which used to be called G Suite and may still be called that by some people. But having the applications unavailable really just stops people dead in their tracks in some situations from getting work done. So it's good that it was only 50 minutes. And so even for people who were in the middle of their workday, it's didn't completely kill productivity, but you know, it's something to keep an eye on, and we hope that cloud services out there can tighten up their game a little bit and make sure that that doesn't happen moving forward. And lastly, just to wrap these up, again, these are three really kind of big stories that we just covered, even though we're leading right into Christmas. It tells you that all of the issues out there in the cybersecurity space are not going away, not taking a holiday. And so make sure that you're staying vigilant as well over the course of this holiday period, just as much as you would be any other time of year.
Right.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast. Check out the links in the description for more information about everything we discussed. Subscribe or follow us now, however you listen, to ensure you get our latest episodes as soon as they're available. And please do rate and review us. That helps us immensely. Visit Firewalls.com for all your network security needs, and give us a follow on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. For Andrew Harmon, I'm Kevin Baxter. Happy holidays again. We'll be back soon with another episode. But in the meantime, we remind you to get secure,
stay secure.
stay secure.